We like to believe fathers protect their daughters, that they'd do anything, even die, to keep them safe. But what happens when a father decides the only way to protect his child is to become the very danger he fears? As this story unfolds, you won't just question what happened. You'll start to question who we become when love turns into possession, and fear wears the face of someone we trust, because by the end, you'll realize that sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is the one who claims to love you most. Bryce Brogle and Cordelia Lex had spent 4 months living a dream. Their social media told the story in sun-soaked photographs. Sunrise over the Grand Canyon, late-night campfires in Colorado, roadside diners in small towns whose names they'd never remember. They'd driven thousands of miles in Bryce's beat-up truck, sleeping under stars, talking about the future. Bryce was 23, a dreamer who wanted to live off the grid. He talked about buying land, starting a farm, building something real with his hands. Cordelia, just 21, had never felt so free. For the first time in her life, she was away from her father's watchful eye, making her own choices, breathing her own air. But back in Minnesota, Michael Lex was counting the days. Michael had always been what people politely called protective. When Cordelia was in high school, he'd drive by her friends' houses unannounced. He knew her schedule better than she did. When she started dating, he'd run background checks on boys who came to pick her up. Once, he'd hired a private investigator to follow a boyfriend he didn't trust. "He's a helicopter parent," Cordelia would tell friends, laughing it off. But the laughing had gotten harder as she got older. When she'd left for the road trip with Bryce, Michael had called her daily. Sometimes twice a day. "Where are you staying? Who have you met? When are you coming home?" The questions felt like a tightening noose, even from 1,000 miles away. But now they were back. And Michael had been planning. It was supposed to be a quick errand. A cold October evening in Minnesota, October 27th, 2022. Leaves had already surrendered to the season. The air was sharp, the sun long gone by 5 p.m. Bryce and Cordelia had just pulled into Center Township, where Michael lived in a modest house on a quiet street. The kind of place where neighbors waved and nothing ever happened. They were tired from the long drive, eager to shower, unpack, and settle back into normal life. That evening, Michael approached them with a simple request. He needed help moving some boxes to a storage unit about 10 minutes away. Nothing unusual, just a father asking for a hand with some heavy lifting. Cordelia was exhausted. She'd been driving for hours and wanted nothing more than a hot shower and clean clothes. "I'll stay here," she said, kissing Bryce goodbye. "You two go ahead." It was the last time she'd see Bryce alive. Michael and Bryce loaded the boxes into Michael's truck and drove off into the growing darkness. Two men who barely knew each other, connected only by their love for the same woman. But Michael saw it differently. In his mind, only one of them truly loved Cordelia. Only one of them knew what was best for her. The storage facility was isolated, surrounded by empty fields and sparse woods. The kind of place where you could scream and no one would hear you. Michael had chosen it carefully. When Michael returned home alone around 7 p.m., his story was already polished. He found Cordelia in the kitchen, toweling her wet hair. "Where's Bryce?" she asked, looking toward the door. Michael's face was grave. "Honey, you need to sit down." He told her that 2 unmarked vehicles had pulled into the storage facility just as they were leaving. Men in plain clothes, official-looking but showing no badges, had approached their truck. They'd asked for Bryce specifically, put him in the back of a grey sedan, and driven off. "They wouldn't tell me anything," Michael said, his voice heavy with concern. "No charges, no explanation, they just took him." Cordelia was stunned. "Took him where? Who were they?" "I don't know, sweetheart. It all happened so fast. They told me to drive home and wait for contact." But the hours crawled by with no word. Cordelia tried calling Bryce's phone, straight to voicemail. She texted friends, checked social media, called his family. Nothing. Michael watched his daughter pace the living room, wringing her hands, tears streaming down her face. If he felt any guilt about her anguish, he didn't show it. This was necessary, he told himself. This was protection. By the next evening, October 28th, Cordelia couldn't wait any longer. She drove to the sheriff's department and filed a missing person report. And that's when Michael's carefully constructed story began to crumble. Deputy Sheriff Mike Thompson had worked missing persons cases for 15 years. He'd learned to listen not just to what people said, but to what they didn't say, and something about Michael Lex's story didn't sit right. They found Michael at a Halloween party with extended family, dressed as a pirate, laughing with relatives. For a man whose daughter's boyfriend had just been mysteriously arrested by federal agents, he seemed remarkably calm. Thompson pulled him aside for questioning. Michael was cooperative, maybe too cooperative. He walked them through his version of events with the precision of someone who'd rehearsed it. We went to the unit around 5:30. Bryce spent time going through some belongings. Took longer than expected. Around 5:45, we packed up and got in the truck. As we were pulling out, two vehicles with flashing lights, not sirens, just lights, pulled in front of us. He described how officers had approached calmly. No yelling, no drama. One had gotten in the truck with Bryce, speaking to him in low tones. Another had driven Michael home. It was all so strange, Michael kept saying, so professional, but so secretive. But when Thompson pressed for details, descriptions of uniforms, badge numbers, agency identifications, Michael had nothing.
Did you get any names?
No. Did they show you any paperwork?
No. Did they tell you which agency they were with?
No, they were very quiet about everything. Then Thompson asked about Bryce's phone.
Do you still have it?
No, Michael said quickly. 10 minutes later, he changed his story. Actually, it was in the vehicle. I threw it out at a gas station. Why would you do that?
Michael paused, and for the first time his composure cracked slightly. To protect my daughter. I didn't want anyone tracking it. I was scared. Thompson leaned forward. Scared of what? If federal agents had arrested Bryce legitimately, why would you be scared?
I don't know. The whole thing felt wrong.
Then came the detail that made Thompson's blood run cold.
Bryce said something strange on the way to the storage unit, Michael volunteered. He said, I've got a feeling someone's going to get arrested when we get home. Did he say why? No, but he mentioned something about the FBI watching him, like he was paranoid about something. It was too convenient. Too neat, like Michael was trying to plant seeds for why mysterious federal agents might want Bryce. Thompson excused himself and called for backup. They were going to search that gas station. What they found in the gas station dumpster made everything clear. Not one phone, but two. Both belonging to Bryce. The phone records told a different story than Michael's timeline. They showed that Michael had returned to the storage unit the morning after Bryce's arrest, alone. He'd stayed there for 22 minutes, long enough to clean, long enough to dispose of evidence. The GPS data from Michael's truck revealed another stop that morning, a patch of public land near Lake Edward, about 15 minutes from the storage facility, remote, wooded, the kind of place where you could bury something and expect it to stay buried. But Michael wasn't done digging holes in his story. If you're finding this case as shocking as I am, please hit that like button and subscribe for more true crime stories that will keep you up at night. Your support helps me bring you these deep dives into the darkest corners of human nature. What cracked the case wasn't forensic science or brilliant detective work. It was family. That night, after hours of police questioning, Michael sat in his sister Jen's kitchen. The house was quiet, kids asleep upstairs. There was a bag of ice melting by the garage door. Michael had complained about his back hurting. Jen noticed her brother seemed different. Quieter than usual, but also strangely relieved, like a weight had been lifted. The police were asking a lot of questions, he said, stirring his coffee absently.
Well, of course they were. Poor Cordelia must be going crazy with worry. Michael looked up. She'll be better off. What do you mean?
He set down his mug. Jen, I need to borrow your car tomorrow. I don't want the police tracking my truck.
Something in his tone made her stomach drop. Mike, what's going on?
He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. Then, without looking up, he said the words that would haunt the family forever. I buried him. Bryce, I shot him. They'll never find the body.
Jen didn't scream. She didn't panic. She sat perfectly still, trying to process what her brother had just confessed.
You what? It had to be done, Michael said, his voice eerily calm. He was going to hurt her. I could see it. The way he controlled her, kept her away from family. She couldn't see what he really was. Mike, you can't be serious. Dead serious. He stood up, suddenly businesslike. I need that car, Jen, just for a few hours tomorrow.
After he left, Jen sat alone in her kitchen until dawn, wrestling with the impossible. Then she called their brother Patrick.
Patrick worked the night shift at a nearby gas station. He'd always been the steady one in the family, the one people turned to in a crisis. He listened to Jen's story without interruption, then hung up and drove straight to the sheriff's department. I need to report something, he told the desk sergeant. And I need to stay anonymous. At sunrise on October 30th, a team of investigators made their way through the woods near Lake Edward. The October frost crunched under their boots as they searched for signs of disturbance. They found it within an hour. Fresh branches had been cut and scattered over a patch of ground. The leaves didn't match the surrounding forest floor. They'd been gathered from elsewhere and dumped here. Underneath, the soil was loose, recently disturbed. The dig wasn't professional, it was desperate, hasty. Michael had tried to make the grave deep enough, but panic and exhaustion had won out. Bryce's body was buried less than 3 feet down, wrapped in a tarp. He'd been shot once in the back of the head. Execution style. The medical examiner would later determine that Bryce had been kneeling when he was killed. Had Michael forced him to his knees? Had Bryce begged for his life? Had he thought about Cordelia in his final moments? These were questions that would torment everyone who knew the case. Michael was arrested at his home on November 2nd, 2022. He didn't resist. If anything, he seemed relieved that the charade was finally over. In custody, he began spinning a new story, one where he was the hero, not the villain. Bryce was abusive, he claimed, controlling. Michael had seen bruises on Cordelia, had noticed how she'd become distant from family during the relationship. The road trip, he said, had been Bryce's way of isolating her completely. I was protecting my daughter, he told investigators. Any father would have done the same thing. But when police interviewed Cordelia, she painted a different picture entirely. Yes, she and Bryce had disagreements. What couple doesn't? But abuse, physical violence, never. Bryce was gentle, she told them, tears streaming down her face. He wouldn't hurt a fly. He rescued injured animals. He cried during sad movies. The idea that he would hit me is insane. Her social media told the same story. 4 months of photographs showing a young woman in love, traveling with someone who made her laugh, exploring the country with someone who shared her sense of adventure. There were no hidden bruises, no signs of fear, no red flags that friends or family had missed. The truth was simpler and more sinister. Michael couldn't bear to lose control of his daughter, and Bryce represented everything he feared. Independence, adulthood, a life where Cordelia's first loyalty wouldn't be to her father. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered evidence that painted a chilling picture of premeditation. In the storage unit, they found traces of bleach on the concrete floor. Someone had tried to clean up blood. They found a plastic sled with dried blood stains, likely used to transport Bryce's body from the storage unit to Michael's truck. Phone records revealed that months earlier, Michael had called Cordelia's landlord, asking if he'd ever seen signs that Bryce was hurting her. When the landlord mentioned he'd once noticed what might have been bruises on Cordelia's arms, Michael's response was chilling. "I already dug the hole." At the time, the landlord thought it was just an expression, a father's way of saying he'd handle any man who hurt his daughter. But in retrospect, it sounded like something much darker, a plan already in motion. Michael claimed he'd only brought the gun to deal with vermin at a work site, but the .22 caliber pistol was loaded with hollow point bullets, not the kind you use on rats and squirrels. The kind you use when you want to make sure your target doesn't get back up. Michael Lex's trial began in April 2024, 18 months after Bryce's murder. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Sarah Chen, painted a methodical picture of a controlling father who'd committed the ultimate act of possession. "This wasn't a crime of passion," Chen told the jury in her opening statement. "This was a calculated execution, planned and carried out by a man who couldn't accept that his adult daughter had the right to choose her own life." The defense tried to paint Michael as a concerned father who'd snapped under pressure. They brought in character witnesses who described him as a devoted single parent who'd raised Cordelia after her mother left when she was young. They suggested that years of worry and stress had led to a moment of temporary insanity. But the evidence was overwhelming: the premeditated phone call about digging the hole, the cleanup supplies, the elaborate cover story, the return trip to dispose of evidence. And then there was Cordelia herself. She took the stand on the trial's third day, dressed in black, her voice barely above a whisper. She described the Bryce she knew: kind, funny, ambitious. She talked about their plans for the future, their dreams of building a life together. "Did Bryce ever hit you?" the prosecutor asked. "Never." "Did he ever threaten you?"
Never.
"Did you ever feel afraid of him?" "The only person I was ever afraid of," Cordelia said, looking directly at her father for the first time since his arrest, "was sitting at our kitchen table." The jury deliberated for less than 8 hours. They found Michael Lex guilty of first-degree premeditated murder. During sentencing, several family members spoke. Bryce's mother, barely able to stand, described the young man whose life had been cut short. His sister read a letter he'd written to Cordelia during their road trip, full of plans and dreams that would never come true. Cordelia didn't speak at the sentencing. She'd said everything she needed to say. Michael was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the bailiff led him away, he turned to look at his daughter one last time. She didn't meet his eyes. In the months after the trial, Cordelia posted sparingly on social media, but when she did, her message was clear. "A very special person was taken from me, but I know now that he will never leave. He's my guardian angel forever. I love you so much, Bryce." Later, she wrote, "I think about you and Bryce all the time." She never once suggested that her father had been protecting her. She never once indicated that Bryce had been a threat. Because the only threat in Cordelia's life had been the man who was supposed to keep her safe. True crime cases like this force us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of love and control. Michael Lex genuinely believed he was protecting his daughter. In his twisted logic, he was the hero of this story, the vigilant father who saw through Bryce's facade and took action. But protection becomes something else entirely when it's poisoned by obsession, when love transforms into possession, when a parent's need to control overrides their child's right to choose. Michael had spent years convincing himself that only he truly understood what was best for Cordelia. Her friends didn't see clearly. Her romantic interests had ulterior motives. Only he could be trusted with her well-being. This kind of thinking doesn't develop overnight. It builds slowly, fed by small justifications and rationalized control. The background checks on boyfriends, the surprise visits, the constant phone calls during the road trip. Each boundary crossed makes the next one easier to justify. By the time Michael decided that Bryce needed to die, he'd already convinced himself that this was an act of love, not murder. The case devastated multiple families. Bryce's parents lost a son whose life was just beginning. His sister lost a brother and best friend. His friends lost someone who'd made them laugh, dream, and believe in possibilities. Cordelia lost even more. She lost the man she loved, yes, but she also lost her father, her sense of safety, and her ability to trust her own judgment. If the person who was supposed to protect her could betray her so completely, who could she ever trust again? She lost her innocence about the nature of evil. She learned that monsters don't always hide in shadows. Sometimes they pour you coffee and ask about your day. The community struggled to reconcile the Michael they thought they knew with the Michael who'd executed a young man in cold blood. Neighbors described him as quiet, helpful, the kind of guy who'd shovel your driveway without being asked. And how do you process the fact that evil can wear such an ordinary face? This case raises disturbing questions about the line between protection and control, between love and possession. How many other Michael Lexes are out there convincing themselves that their need to control is actually love? How many young people are being protected by parents who can't let go? The digital age has made it easier than ever for parents to monitor, track, and control their adult children. Phone tracking apps, social media surveillance, financial oversight. The tools of control are more sophisticated than ever. But at what point does protection become imprisonment? At what point does love become something toxic? Michael Lex represents the extreme end of parental control, but his mindset exists on a spectrum. Somewhere out there, other parents are making smaller versions of his choices, justifying their control as protection, their possessiveness as love. The tragedy is that genuine protection would have meant supporting Cordelia's choices, even if they were different from what Michael wanted. It would have meant trusting her judgment, respecting her autonomy, and being there if things went wrong. Instead, he chose to play God with her life, and in doing so, destroyed it. We like to believe that fathers protect their daughters, and most do in healthy ways that honor their children's growing independence and right to choose their own paths. But sometimes protection becomes something else when it's poisoned by obsession, when love turns to control, when fear turns into justification for the unthinkable. Michael believed he was saving his daughter from a life she couldn't see clearly, but in doing so he took away her choice, he took away her voice, he took away the man she loved, and ultimately he took away her father too. Bryce Brogle was 23 years old. He wanted to build a life off the grid, start a farm, live simply with the woman he loved. Instead, his story ended in a shallow grave, hidden behind a lie that was too clean to be true. Today, he rests in a cemetery in Minnesota, surrounded by the prairie he'd dreamed of farming. Cordelia visits sometimes, bringing flowers and talking to him about the life they should have had together. Sometimes evil doesn't come with a ski mask, it doesn't break down your door in the middle of the night. Sometimes it walks through your door, pours a cup of coffee, and insists it's doing what's best for you. The most dangerous person in your life might be the one who claims to love you most. Thanks for listening. Stay safe out there and always trust your gut, even if the threat is coming from someone you love.